Hello, my dear students, and welcome back. I know your exams are just around the corner, and a lot of you have been telling me, Sir, the Three Orders chapter is so confusing. But don't you worry at all. Trust me, it's actually quite simple. So come on, let's break it down together. Ready? Let's start.
Now, I know how much you all love your video games and movies. You know, the ones with kings and queens, knights in their shiny armor, and these massive, huge castles. Have you ever stopped and wondered, was any of that real? Well, guess what? It absolutely was. And this chapter, it's all about understanding the world where these people actually lived.
So how did this society work? Well, the whole system ran on something called feudalism. Now, don't get scared by the big word. It's super simple. Just imagine you're in an online gaming squad. The king is your squad leader. But he can't manage the whole map by himself, right? So he gets his best players, the lords, to be his teammates. He gives them land, which was the real loot back then, and in return, they promise to be loyal and fight for him whenever he needs them. That's it. That is feudalism for you. Now, society was basically structured like a big pyramid, okay? And it was divided into 3 groups, or what they called orders. Right at the very top, we have the first order. These were the people who prayed. We're talking about the priests, the bishops, and the monks of the church. And listen, you should not underestimate their power. In a time when faith was everything and most people couldn't even read or write, the clergy were the ones with all the knowledge. They held the keys to heaven. In fact, they were often even more powerful than the king. They had their own laws, they owned huge amounts of land, and they collected a special tax called a tithe, which was basically 1/10 of everything a poor peasant produced. You can imagine how rich and powerful this made them. And this picture, this shows you their power perfectly. Just look at the size of this cathedral. Baksho, to build something like this, it took centuries and an unbelievable amount of money. These weren't just places for prayer, they were statements of pure power, reminding everyone who was really in charge. Okay, so let's move down to the next level of our pyramid. Here, we find the second order. And who were they? They were the nobles and the knights, basically the warriors, the ones who fought and protected all the land. For the nobility, their power came from just one thing: land. The king was the #1 landlord, okay? And he gave big pieces of land to his most important nobles, who were called his vassals. Then, these lords would give smaller pieces of their land to knights who became their vassals. See? It was like a chain of loyalty. In return for the land, they had to provide soldiers for the king's wars. They were like little kings in their own areas, with their own courts and their own small armies. And this is the kind of place they lived in. You see, a castle wasn't just a home, Beta. It was a military fort, it was the main office for ruling the area, and it was a giant symbol of the lord's complete control over his land and every single person living on it. Okay, attention everyone. Exam alert. This is a very common 3-mark question, so you need to pay close attention. I'll tell you exactly how to write the perfect answer. So, what was a knight's life all about? Well, first point, his main duty was military service and being 100% loyal to his lord. Second, this wasn't an easy job. Training started when they were just little boys, and it went on for years, making them expert fighters. And third, what did they get in return? For all this service, the lord gave them a piece of land known as a fief, which was enough to support their family. You can take a screenshot of these points for your notes.
So, we have the people who prayed and the people who fought. But who was feeding them? Who was doing all the hard work? Well, that brings us to the biggest group of all, the very foundation of the pyramid, the third order, the people who worked.
Now, this is a very important point, so listen carefully. There were 2 kinds of peasants. You had free peasants, who were a bit like tenants today. They rented land from the lord. But most peasants, the huge majority, were serfs. And a serf's life was incredibly tough. They were not free people. They were literally tied to the land. They had to work on the lord's own fields for free. And they couldn't leave the estate or even get married without the lord's permission. Let's take a quick Google Maps tour of their world, shall we? This map shows a manor, which was the lord's entire estate. You can see the big manor house where the lord lived, you can see the church, and all these fields surrounding them. This was their whole world, a self-sufficient little universe where the lord controlled every single thing. And this image, Beta, this really shows you the reality of their lives. It was just back-breaking physical work, day after day after day. It was the sweat of this third order, which was more than 90% of the population, that kept the whole system running and paid for the comfortable lives of the other two orders.
But as you know, nothing lasts forever, right? So, starting from the 14th century, this perfectly neat pyramid started to shake and crumble. A whole series of crises came along and started to change everything.
Just imagine this. It was like a perfect storm. First, the weather suddenly became very cold and wet. This destroyed the crops, which led to a terrible famine. Then, just as things were bad, the Black Death arrived. It was a terrifying disease, a plague, that killed almost half the people in Europe. It was a huge shock. With so few workers left, the peasants started to demand more money and better treatment, which led to huge revolts all across Europe.
And can you believe it? This little creature you see here was the main carrier. The black rat carried infected fleas on ships from one city to another, spreading the plague absolutely everywhere. A tiny little animal that completely changed the history of the world. Amazing, isn't it?
At the very same time, something else was happening. New towns and cities were starting to grow. Now, for a serf who was stuck on a manor, the town was like a dream of freedom. In fact, there was a famous saying, "Town air makes you free." This meant that if a serf could escape from his lord and manage to live in a town for 1 year and 1 day, he legally became a free man. This led to a whole new group of people, merchants, craftsmen, whose money came from business and skill, not from land. They didn't really fit into the old pyramid. They were almost like a fourth order.
You know, all this makes me think, what about our society today? Do you think we are also divided into different groups or orders? Maybe not based on praying or fighting, but what about based on how much money people have or the kind of jobs they do? It's something to think about, isn't it? Let me know what you think in the comments.
All right, my dear students, it's time for a super quick final revision. If you forget everything else from this chapter, please just remember these 3 main points for your exam. 1. Society was a 3-level pyramid. At the top, the clergy who prayed. In the middle, the nobility who fought. And at the bottom, the peasants who worked. 2. The glue holding it all together was feudalism, a system based on loyalty for land. And 3. This system started to break down because of big problems like famine, the Black Death plague, and the growth of new towns. Simple, right? Got it? Perfect. And that's it. That's the whole chapter, made simple just for you. See, I told you it was easy. You are all so smart and you work so hard. I just know you're going to do wonderfully in your exams. You have totally got this. If you found this quick explainer helpful, please do give it a like and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter summary. And please share it with your friends who might also find history a little bit difficult. If you have any doubts or questions, just ask me in the comments below. All the very best, and I will see you in the next one.